Welcome to the Digital Intellect, your source for breaking news and trending stories from around the world. It started with a whisper, a faint, uncertain sound that drifted through the narrow alleys of Cairo as dusk settled over the city. It was a rumor too impossible to believe, yet too persistent to ignore. In Cairo's coffeehouses, men leaned in close, speaking in hushed tones about strange movements near the great dams, stories that seemed to grow with every retelling. The story spread quickly, carried by word of mouth and worried glances, from the bustling capital to the quiet, sun-baked villages lining the river's edge. Social media buzzed with grainy, shaky videos of unusual activity at the Aswan High Dam, flashing lights, shadowy figures, and the unmistakable sense that something was wrong. The government's silence only fueled the fear, as officials refused to comment and state media offered no answers. Whispers turned to anxious chatter in crowded markets and behind closed doors at home, as families speculated about what might be happening. Was it a military drill, a technical failure, or something far worse? An act of sabotage, or a disaster in the making? The Nile, Egypt's eternal river, seemed to be slowing, its once unstoppable current now eerily subdued. Downstream, water levels dropped, first subtly, then dramatically, as the river's familiar banks began to reveal secrets long hidden beneath the surface. Ancient mud banks emerged, unseen for generations, exposing remnants of forgotten structures and the bones of history itself. Fishermen stared in disbelief as their nets snagged on the exposed riverbed, their livelihoods suddenly uncertain, their faces etched with confusion and fear. The river's mighty pulse was weakening. Panic set in as crowds gathered along the banks, searching for answers in the shrinking waters. Long lines formed at stores as people hoarded bottled water, desperate to secure what little they could in the face of growing uncertainty. The city's usual rhythm, traffic, laughter, the calls to prayer, was replaced by a tense, anxious silence that seemed to hang in the air. Along the Nile, farmers watched their thirsty crops with growing dread, worry etched deep into their sun-weathered faces. Everything depended on that water, their fields, their families, their future. For the first time in living memory, the Nile seemed to be vanishing, its absence felt in every corner of the land. The rumors were now reality, unfolding before millions of disbelieving eyes, both on the riverbanks and in living rooms across the nation. Egypt's lifeline was faltering, and no one knew what would come next. The uncertainty was as heavy as the silence. The day the Nile stood still, the nation held its breath, united in fear and hope, waiting for a sign that the river and life would flow again. The official announcement came without warning, catching even the most seasoned political analysts off guard. All major networks cut to a special broadcast, interrupting regular programming as a sense of urgency swept across the country. A government spokesperson, face grim and voice steady, confirmed the unthinkable. Egypt had halted the Nile's flow south of the Aswan High Dam, a move unprecedented in the nation's modern history. The words stunned the nation, sending shockwaves through every home, office, and street. The spokesperson cited national security, failed negotiations with neighboring countries, and existential threats to Egypt's water supply as the reasons behind this drastic step. Details were scarce, the shutdown's duration was unclear, and speculation began to swirl among journalists and citizens alike. It was a declaration, not a discussion. The government's tone left no room for debate or dissent. Egypt was taking matters into its own hands, determined to assert control over its destiny and resources. The government called it a necessary measure to protect the country's future, emphasizing that survival was at stake. The broadcast ended abruptly, leaving the nation in stunned silence, as if time itself had paused. In homes and cafes, people stared at their screens, struggling to process the news, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. The government had done what no leader had ever dared, turned off the Nile. Confusion and fear erupted, rippling through every neighborhood. Phones rang, disbelief echoed, and people gathered in urgent hushed groups, seeking answers and reassurance from one another. The official confirmation ignited panic, not calm. People rushed to ATMs and markets, worried about what tomorrow might bring. The world reacted instantly. News channels flashed the headline, "Egypt halts Nile River flow." Diplomats scrambled to respond, the UN called an emergency meeting, and global markets trembled, fearing the wider consequences of this bold move. The move was seen as a historic gamble with global implications, sparking heated debates among experts and leaders worldwide. Egypt's action was no longer just a domestic crisis, it had become an international flashpoint overnight. The world was watching, waiting for what would happen next, as uncertainty gripped not just Egypt but the entire region. The cradle of civilization was now the epicenter of uncertainty, its future hanging in the balance as history unfolded in real time. The day after the announcement, an eerie quiet settled over Cairo. The city, usually alive with the sounds of mourning, felt as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. People flocked to the riverbanks, staring in disbelief at the diminished Nile. The water, once the city's lifeblood, had retreated, leaving behind only questions and fear. Feluccas sat stranded on muddy ground. The river was a shadow of itself. The familiar sight of boats gliding across the water was gone, replaced by silence and exposed earth. The psychological shock was profound. Egyptians saw their identity reflected in the river's decline. For generations, the Nile had been a symbol of continuity and hope. Old men wept, children pointed in fear and confusion. The loss was not just physical but emotional, a wound felt by all. The Nile, once a place of life, became a place of mourning. People gathered in silent vigils, laying flowers and lighting candles for what was lost. Meanwhile, chaos grew in the city. The tension was palpable, spreading from the riverbanks into every street and alley. Taps ran dry, first in high-rises, then across entire districts. The sound of water, once taken for granted, was now a memory. Fights broke out over bottled water. Government water trucks were overwhelmed. Desperation grew as supplies dwindled and tempers flared. The city's social fabric began to fray. Families argued, neighbors turned on each other, and patience wore thin. Fear and anger replaced shock. The city's mood shifted from disbelief to outrage as people demanded answers. Parents worried for their children, businesses faced ruin, hospitals pleaded for water, their staff helpless as resources ran out. Protests erupted, demanding answers and the return of the river. The people's voices grew louder, echoing through the city's empty streets. The government's promise of a temporary shutdown brought little comfort. Skepticism and distrust filled the air as hope faded. Cairo was a tinderbox, and the Nile's silence was the spark. In the darkness, the city waited, uncertain of what would come next. For millions, the crisis was personal, a fight for survival. In the Nile Delta, farmers watched their fields turn to dust as irrigation canals dried up. Crops withered, the land cracked, and a way of life began to vanish. Fishermen's nets came up empty, the river's stagnant pools could no longer sustain life. Livelihoods disappeared overnight. The shutdown rippled through the economy. Blackouts hit as hydroelectric power failed, factories closed and tourism collapsed. The images of a dying Nile scared away visitors and investors alike. The economic shock was swift and brutal. Beyond the numbers, the cultural loss was immense. The Nile is woven into Egypt's soul, its songs, stories, and daily life. Halting the river was like stopping the nation's heartbeat. No government statement could fill the void. The wound was deep, severing Egypt's connection to its past. The struggle for every drop became a struggle for identity itself. The Nile's shutdown sent shockwaves beyond Egypt. In Sudan, water levels dropped, threatening agriculture and power. The Sudanese government condemned Egypt's action as a violation of international agreements. Tensions soared across the Nile basin, with all eyes on Ethiopia and its Grand Renaissance Dam. Egypt's drastic move was a message to Addis Ababa and the world about the chaos of disrupted water flows. The international community called for restraint, fearing the specter of water wars. The crisis threatened not just regional stability, but global trade and food security. The world was reminded, water security is global security. To grasp the crisis, you must understand the Nile's place in Egypt's story. For 5,000 years, the river has been Egypt's lifeblood. Civilizations rose and fell on its banks. Its floods shaped the land and the people. Today, over 95% of Egyptians live along the Nile. The river provides nearly all the country's fresh water and much of its power. The Aswan High Dam was built to control the river, but it underscored Egypt's total dependence. The Nile is not just a resource, it's national identity and survival. Any threat to its flow is seen as a threat to Egypt's existence. The current crisis forced the nation to confront a terrifying question: what is Egypt without the Nile? The answer was too frightening to face. The roots of the crisis lie in a decade of failed diplomacy over Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam. For Ethiopia, the dam is hope and progress. For Egypt, it's a mortal threat. Years of negotiations failed to produce a binding agreement on water sharing. Egypt demanded guarantees. Ethiopia insisted on its right to develop. As Ethiopia filled the dam, Egypt's desperation grew. Diplomatic efforts stalled and public pressure mounted. The government faced a stark choice: risk water shortages or appear weak. The decision to halt the Nile was a dramatic warning, a self-inflicted crisis to show the world what was at stake. Egypt gambled everything to force action. The world could no longer ignore the consequences. The shutdown was a humanitarian and ecological disaster. Food shortages, economic collapse, and environmental ruin swept Egypt. The crisis exposed the danger of relying on a single water source. In its wake, Egypt launched sweeping water reforms, desalination, conservation, and new technologies. The disaster became a catalyst for innovation and change. Internationally, the shock forced renewed negotiations. The world realized that unilateral actions would only lead to shared ruin. The Nile crisis became a lesson for all. Water is the world's most precious and contested resource. The future depends on cooperation, not conflict. New treaties, new institutions, and a shared commitment are essential. The story of the Nile is a warning and a call to action. The fate of one river can shape the destiny of nations.